So, after the Gintama video, you most likely expected my next ranking would be on another anime, if not another TV show. But no, not today, fellows. For now, I want to take a crack at something a little less time-consuming, which might sound a little bit weird when I'm still watching around 40 hours of film, but that's neither here nor there. I think that just says more about the circles of hell I've been through to make this kind of content. And you might be wondering why I choose to rank and review what it is I'm talking about, but here's my thinking. I've watched most Disney movies already. There are several I know like the back of my hand, so reviewing them would be easy. Okay, easier, but with these videos, I want to experience something new, whether that's for better or for worse. And I can wholeheartedly say that I've seen none of the Disney direct-to-DVD animated sequels. Millennials know exactly what I'm talking about, not that I am one. They're pretty much a lost art form we never see anymore, but they existed in pop culture for a while, and when they were everywhere. Basically, a DVD is this compact disc we bought to watch things on before streaming. Basically, in the 90s, Disney got an idea. An awful idea. Disney got an absolutely awful idea. They decided that with the booming direct-to-video market becoming as large as it was, they should try cashing in on it by making their own cheaper original content, and one of their most lucrative ways of doing this was through sequels to their beloved properties. Aladdin 2, Little Mermaid 2, Bambi 2, Fox and the Hound 2? If there was a classic movie of theirs that didn't already have a sequel, they made a direct-to-video one as soon as possible, and by God, there were a lot of them. Not counting the Tinkerbell and Winnie the Pooh spin-offs, which I won't be covering because, come on, they still had 26 original movies produced. 26! That's twice as many movies as Star Trek, including the reboots. Well, technically there are 26, it's more like 24 for reasons I'll talk about later. But what kind of idiot would want to watch all of them? Anyway, this is my blind watch through and ranking of every single direct-to-video Disney sequel. Hopefully at least a few of them are good, but I'm not gonna get my hopes too high. Ah, The Return of Jafar, the barely feature-length film that started it all. In a way, you could say that all the movies that came after this were produced directly thanks to this being successful. So the first thing I want to ask is, how did this movie generate $300 million in profit? Jesus H. Christ, there has to be a type 1 there somewhere, because this is not the type of movie to get those returns. I didn't expect much from a direct-to-DVD Aladdin sequel, as I should have, but I wasn't ready for just how incredibly boring everything about this movie is. Like, woohoo, wacky Aladdin spinoff, I wonder what ideas they have. Apparently, not much. For over half the movie, almost nothing at all happens. The premise goes that Iago finds his way back to Agrabah and wants to scheme his way into the good life while leaving Jafar behind, but what's this? Iago starts liking Aladdin and starts regretting his decisions before an inevitable liar revealed moment breaks them apart in the third act? Color me shocked. Of course, Jafar is back, as the name implies, but he only really starts playing an active role in the plot after 30 minutes of this hour-long experience, so for having his name plastered on the cover, you might be getting less of him than you bargained for. Instead, up till that point, we follow this Aladdin OC, Abysmal, in his incredibly uninteresting adventures, and I do mean uninteresting. If you want to know who noticeably isn't back though, we've got Dan Castellaneta, the voice of Homer Simpson, doing his best Robin Williams impression as the genie since Robin Williams obviously isn't here. There's a complicated history behind why that isn't the case, mostly coming down to Disney being Disney and going behind Robin's back on an agreement they had, but that's not what we need to focus on here. I will give props to Castellaneta for trying, he's clearly giving it his all, but the genie is unfortunately such a non-presence without Williams voicing him. Despite how often he's shoehorned in to make jokes and references here, the genie was made for Williams, both in terms of personality and ability to ad-lib, so having someone else voice him fundamentally feels wrong. And you can tell there's nowhere near as much of the same pull as before, so him being there as often as he is comes off as filler, which it very much is. And speaking of characters that get too much screen time, Iago. Honestly, he gets more screen time and plot focus than Jafar ever does, but I guess Return of Iago wasn't gonna move those 15 million VHS copies. Could've fooled me, considering he's not only given a song, but he's given 2 songs! Iago, the sidekick whose most recognizable trait is that he's voiced by Gilbert Gottfried, who, while I love, is known for having a shrill, nasally voice.
Holy fuck, is this wrong?
I.e., not ideal for singing, let alone with Jasmine in a duet. And those songs aren't memorable at all, not in the slightest, but they go on forever. All I can remember is Iago going, la la, I can do this on my own, la, la, for like 5 whole minutes in total. Glad we got to follow him for so much of the movie, and the visuals can't even compensate, since while obviously you'd expect it to look worse than the first movie, being made for $5 million as opposed to the $28 million budget of the original, this doesn't even look like that. There's almost no shading for a majority of the film, and I'd be more inclined to think this was just a packet of Aladdin the TV show put into a compilation before I ever thought it was meant to be a singular, higher than TV budget movie. Come on, you couldn't afford backgrounds for the musical numbers? Just gonna have all the characters sing in saturated voids of nothing? Yeah, okay. And do I even need to mention how often designs go off model or poorly lip sync? That's kind of the tools of the trade in the direct-to-DVD business. I really hope whatever comes next is at least a little bit more entertaining, since God, this was boring. It was a challenge to keep my eyes focused on the screen and not at any nearby cars going by. And that includes the attemptedly grand fight scene between Jafar and all the protagonists. When you find a way to make a magic battle uninteresting, you know there's something wrong. Absolutely awful. This should be a shame to think it has any right being compared to something as amazing as the original Aladdin. And wait, I just noticed I didn't mention Aladdin himself in this entire segment because he and Jasmine are that forgettable here. God, this movie sucks! It's almost insulting how much better this movie is than Return of Jafar, and that's no exaggeration. In almost every conceivable way, it's improved on what the previous film did and actually crosses over into feeling like more than just a sequel to Aladdin, but a, well, movie, instead of a combination of TV episodes. I swear the quality change was so sudden it gave me whiplash, but in a good way. Yes, I am a masochist. So the plot centers around how Jasmine and Aladdin are finally getting married, but after they get caught up in a heist by the band of 40 thieves, led by Aladdin's long-lost father Cassim, Aladdin eventually finds himself trying to help his dad look for the Vanishing Isle, an island that's never in the same place, to try finding the Hand of Midas, an artifact that turns anything it touches to gold. Notice how, in my plot description, it sounded like things are always actively happening in The King of Thieves, as opposed to prodding along for almost its entire run. And yeah, the pace is pretty fast, but works to the film's advantage by having everything flow coherently without over-explaining concepts or leaving room for filler. For instance, it never directly stated that the Hand of Midas turns everything to gold. Instead, it displayed it visually, giving an air of mystery to the object while also condensing any unnecessary dialogue to focus more on the action. From beginning to end, important events relating to the story are happening, which you might expect from movies in general, but let's not forget about the last entry on this list. And that's not the only improvement by a long shot. The characters, they resemble what they did in the first movie and have interactions that would make sense after the events that occurred in that film. Like, I couldn't stand how Jasmine acted for most of Return considering the context of the previous film. Oh no, Aladdin brought Iago back without telling her. She should totally assume that he did it maliciously and get mad at the person who just saved her entire kingdom from destruction. Thankfully, none of that passes over into King of Thieves, having a scene directly contrasting Return where she discovers who Aladdin's dad is, but instead of blowing up at him, she hears out his reasoning and completely understands. Hell, even after Aladdin frees Cassim and goes back to face his punishment, she sticks by him and knows he did it out of love. That's the kind of thing you'd expect to see from Aladdin and Jasmine after the first movie, and I love it significantly more. The two of them are just so in love with each other in a way that feels completely genuine and sweet. I wasn't expecting their romance to be organic, but goddamn, that musical sequence where Aladdin randomly just says "I love you" actually hit me in the feels. The two completely trust each other and never pass excessive judgment without hearing the other out first, and that's so much more refreshing than the bickering shit we saw in one film prior. Genie is utilized way better too, finally being voiced by Robin Williams again after the dispute got fixed, and does it show or what? This is the Genie from Aladdin we've come to know. He commands the screen through sheer personality, and more than that, he acts as a supportive figure for what Aladdin wants to do just as much as Jasmine, letting Al fight his own battles when needed instead of using genie magic to solve every issue. Unlike Return, he's got far more importance to the plot as a whole while not taking away from the main conflict, and in regards to that, Aladdin's dad Cassim is far more complex than you'd first assume. He's a thief by nature and left his family in search of the Hand of Midas, thinking that until he had it, he couldn't show his face to them, but upon realizing Aladdin is his son, Cassim tries his best to treat him well rather than pushing Aladdin away. And instead of using that all-too-tired trope of criminal parents being good for nothing so don't care about their kids, Cassim never intentionally ropes Aladdin into any schemes, manipulates him, or ask for pity in any way. He knows he fucked up by leaving without saying goodbye, and he isn't proud of his lifestyle when it leads to others getting hurt, lamenting that he thinks it's impossible for him to ever change. Throughout the film, we see that ideology clash with Aladdin, who equally wants the best for his father, and even after feeling betrayed, wants him to live a life outside of chains rather than being imprisoned for life. The two have a really complicated relationship as far as father-son duos go, but that's not a bad thing by any means, and considering Cassim is an entirely original character made for King of Thieves, the fact that he's so interesting is astonishing. I especially appreciate how the writers never take the cheap route of having him and Aladdin get into unnecessarily long squabbles when saying less can mean so much more. Equally, I also enjoyed the antagonist, Saluk, who's got infinitely more screen presence than second movie Jafar, weirdly being more threatening despite having no powers besides Shredder Claws. Plus his name isn't Abysmal, so I immediately found him more compelling. Not to mention more cartoonishly evil. Those more fun personalities help in accentuating the music too, which is far more catchy, plot-relevant, fun, and memorable than Return ever was, in part also thanks to the visuals that have gotten a major upgrade. They did it. They fixed the color palette, boys. I don't think I could have made it through another movie with such desaturated, boring visuals. Seriously though, I really dig the color presentation throughout this whole thing, not only for being more vibrant, but also more clearly having a vision in mind. Such as when everything goes to blues and reds, or the lighting is super harsh. It gives the impression that the director actually gave a shit about whether or not the film looked like it was made by people, instead of an automated, unfeeling robot with a deadline in the morning, and that adds a ton to the already much better product. If you're asking me, you don't even need to watch Return of Jafar to enjoy this movie. Other than Iago being there, it's pretty much the same as when the original ended, so might as well save yourself the time and consider it irrelevant. It'll get you to watching this sooner. Between Return of Jafar and this, King of Thieves is the best by far. So, if you've ever watched Beauty and the Beast before, it should be obvious that there's nowhere you could go for a sequel, or a prequel for that matter. The Beast's past is the first thing we're told about in the movie, and by the conclusion, he's been transformed back into a human, so there's not exactly anywhere else to go. But wait a second, what if instead, we went for the mythical third option? I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't heard of the idea, it's almost exclusively used for straight-to-DVD movies, but to put it briefly, a midquel is a film that tells a story that happened within the confines of another story. Because, as we know, time passed during Belle's imprisonment living at the castle, but we don't know everything that happened during that time. I mean, one could make an argument that it was so inconsequential that there was no reason to show it, but then again, Disney needs another diamond-studded swimming pool, so Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas exists. For the other movies I've seen, I'll give them this. You can make an argument for why they had a reason to exist, but without a doubt, Enchanted Christmas has to be one of the most pointless retcon retellings I've ever seen. As the name suggests, it's about Belle trying to celebrate Christmas in the castle, but the lore has changed so the Beast got transformed on that day, so he hates it. That's all you really need to know, because based on that plot description, you should be able to piece together every last thing that happens. I guarantee you there are no surprises or twists to be had. Belle tries setting up the party, it goes wrong, then it actually doesn't go wrong, and they celebrate Christmas after the Beast gets over his Ebenezer Scrooge-ass mentality. I would say there's absolutely nothing about this movie to make it worth watching, but we are blessed with the one single saving grace: Tim Curry. Well, technically it's a CGI organ played by Tim Curry, but look at his human design. That's straight up Dr. Frankenfurter from Rocky Horror. It's Timmy Boy in all his flamboyant greatness. And I'm of the strong belief that Tim Curry, by his very presence, is able to make any and every piece of media he's in better, no matter the circumstance. If every movie had Tim Curry doing something in it, we'd be living in a better society. And he absolutely hams it up for his part. Basically, as the dreary organ player, Tim Curry wasn't wanted until the Beast transformed and fell into depression. So he does everything in his power to make sure Belle doesn't cheer the Beast up with a Christmas celebration. And when I say power, I don't mean that in the figurative sense. He can summon music notes as projectiles and conjure up illusions. Why can he do that? Cause he's CGI organ Tim Curry. And what's funnier than that is, even if you think about it for a second, his reason for staying a living object doesn't make much sense. So you're not appreciated at your job. Why not go get a job somewhere else? He clearly doesn't have any direct attachment to the castle or the Beast as a person, so why would he ever want to stay a living organ forever in hopes that the Beast never gets bored of him? You know what, who cares? Instead of complaining, I'd much rather listen to his villain song literally titled, "Don't Fall in Love."
Emotions are a thing all great men overcame. Don't get attached to anyone or anything. Don't fall in love.
He's not even singing, he's just talking to a melody. But that's not my favorite part either. Listen to this line.
Don't you see 5 They can't fall in love if they're dead.
Fucking bawling, I swear to God. I don't know if it's the music sting, the zoom, the lighting difference, the delivery, or maybe all of it, but the fact it's supposed to be taken seriously is so funny. This is why even when he's given a mess script, Tim Curry finds a way to make it better. The man's got natural charisma spewing out every orifice. Honestly, I could spend more time going in depth on the details surrounding CGI organ Tim Curry's late 90s CGI lips than I ever could about the movie in question, since he overshadows the whole project by being automatically more interesting. So with him in mind, and the pretty good for DVD quality animation, I'll put it above Return of Jafar. But other than that, this didn't really have a good reason to exist in the first place, which is something I can't say about the Aladdin sequels. It's harmless, just not interesting one way or another. I take back what I said about Return of Jafar being less of a movie and more of a compilation of TV episodes, because Belle's Magical World is quite literally that with no exaggeration. According to Wikipedia, Disney was going to make an animated series around Beauty and the Beast at some point and scrapped it, but before doing that, they had 3 fully produced episodes and decided, fuck it, let's put them all into a DVD release and say it's a movie. That's all Belle's Magical World is, and by watching through the whole thing, it becomes clear why there wasn't any more of this produced. The shit is boring, uninteresting, poorly animated, generic, and all around a complete waste of time. Have you ever wanted to see the thrilling conflict of Belle and the Beast going back and forth about whether or not they should apologize to each other for 22 minutes? Have you been enthralled but denied the opportunity to see the expanses of that one feather duster Lumiere seduced getting jealous of Belle and trying to kill her? No? Good for you. You're like 99% of people on this earth. I didn't think I'd ever have to explain this concept, but Beauty and the Beast inherently doesn't work as a TV show. The central conflict hinges on the Beast trying to fall in love with Belle in a given time frame, something the movie conveys well in an hour and a half. Consequently, extending that time to potentially multiple seasons of 22-minute episodes would, I don't know, feel a bit dragged out. Not to mention there's only so many stories you could come up with based on Beauty and the Beast's second act and nothing else before it got stale. Belle and Beast have an argument, it's hard for them to patch it up, and the staff laments the Beast will never fall in love, and then they look at the rose and how petals are falling off and all that, but then they do make up, and everyone's happy. Rinse and repeat several times over. Besides them, all there is to watch are the staff of the castle, and if anything, this series of episodes shows that they work much better as a supporting cast and nothing more. Either that or they just need to have much better writers. For the other films, I at least had something to say. Anything to say.
I could go on for hours about Tim Curry and his luscious CGI lips.
But this is the biggest load of nothing I could possibly imagine. There wasn't even an attempt to make all 3 stories shown coherent other than through an incredibly dated CGI library and a non sequitur song. Not to mention we never see the manliest man to ever man, no homo, Gaston, and the thought of never seeing him in multiple potential seasons of this would make me cry out in agony. I have no doubt that the most minimal effort possible was put into this project for its release, and it makes me almost feel guilty to have been so critical of Enchanted Christmas, since that still tried and did some things decently. Bottom of the list so far, no questions asked. And side note, I'm only going to be talking about these unaired TV show compilation movies if the TV show never ended up being made, so I won't be talking about or ranking Hercules Zero to Hero or Tarzan and Jane, since one is just 3 unaired episodes from The Legend of Tarzan, which had already concluded by that quote-unquote film's release, and another is quite literally a compilation of flashback sequences that already existed from the Hercules TV show. So I don't want to hear any bitching that I didn't include them, cause in my eyes, they don't count. They're not their own things. Fuck out of here with that noise. Oh, I know how much water I'm treading by talking about this. It's almost impossible to bring up this movie, let alone the original film, without discussing how incredibly historically inaccurate it is. In fact, it's been mentioned and documented for being as dated as it is so many times that I don't see the need to do so myself. Yet at first I thought it might be necessary for people to know this isn't even close to what actually happened, but you definitely already know that at this point if you've ever heard discussions about the film. And considering just how far it is from history, I might as well consider it a completely separate from any attempt to tell the true story. What's funny about the whole thing is that, really, when you strip away the controversy and look at it as nothing but a fictional story, which it pretty much is, there's not all that much to say. Pocahontas is kind of a forgettable movie, with a forgettable cast, forgettable romance, and forgettable raccoon sidekick. The music sounded nice, but paying attention to the lyrics reveals that
They're not like you and me, which means they must be evil. We must turn the drums of war.
Yeah, it's not good. The only saving grace for Pocahontas was its visuals, and while among the direct-to-video movies, Journey to a New World is certainly the closest to resembling its predecessor, that's about all it has going for it. Okay, that's a bit hyperbolic, the music is alright. Almost all the previous direct-to-video movies so far have barely had songs at all, more so half-finished ideas claiming to be songs, but Pocahontas had some genuinely nice music that I'd be remiss to not bring up. In particular, the opening song, Where Do I Go From Here, sounds like a real Disney number, and that's impressive. I'll give the movie credit for that, but otherwise, it's another big old ball of nothing. John Smith, the totally accurate, muscular, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, Aryan version of the English settler, starts the movie by absolutely, 100% never coming back, dying to the last film's villain, Ratcliffe, who urges the king to go to war with the natives. To keep this from happening, Pocahontas, alongside other 100% accurate depiction of a real person, John Rolfe, has to go to England and show she's civilized enough to get an audience with the king. Hijinks ensue about how you'd expect them to with a bunch of posh Brits. Oh lordy lordy, that woman is climbing up a tree in almost nothing. How undignified, most unorthodox. Why don't you like seeing a bear get poked? What a savage. That goes on for an hour and it's as boring as it sounds. Radcliffe is as two-dimensional a villain as ever, the king is the typical depiction of an idiot in power, all the Brits shown spend their time absolutely stuffing it up. And there's also the discussion of Pocahontas' steamy affair with John Rolfe until John Smith turns out to have lived. Now she has to choose between two pieces of wood both named John. Like, I know in a historical context the two settlers were indeed both named John, though there was no contrived love triangle between them and Pocahontas. But out of all the areas to be historically accurate, why do it in the place that makes your new and old love interests blend together more than they already have by both being stale and uninteresting? Man, I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder. But seriously, it's so contrived and uninspired, and I think the writers kind of knew it because they don't focus on the love triangle aspect almost at all until the very end where, spoiler, John Rolfe goes off with Pocahontas back to Jamestown while John Smith stays in England. Too bad we're never gonna get Pocahontas 3. Pocahontas dies on the way home. Truly would have been a tearjerker. Watching so many subpar to bad sequels might be getting to me by now, but Lion King 2 is pretty good. Going in, I did have some expectations about it, being made fun of for the writing apparently being fanfiction-y, and I get where those people are coming from, but at the same time, damn it, I don't know, I can't find it in me to, dislike this pretty much at all. And out of all the sequels so far, it probably has the biggest shoes to fill when you think about how massive the original Lion King is, so theoretically speaking, it should be the easiest to mess up. So the fact it found a way for me to be charmed by it is a feat in of itself. As the original was a parallel to Hamlet, Simba's Pride takes on the themes of Romeo and Juliet, dealing with a blooming relationship between the daughter of Simba and the heir to Scar, who've been taught to hate each other from different sides of the land, culminating in the two bringing the different prides together through their love. In Simba's case, he takes on the role of the doting, protective father who doesn't know how to let his child be free, but also, he struggles with the idea of following in his father's footsteps, believing that in order to do that, he needs to become him, in turn dampening the relationship between him and Kiara. If these character traits were only one or the other, I might have found him annoying or generic, but with the two mixed together, Simba rises above those stereotypes to be much more compelling, though he's not focused on too much in the story. I like seeing that, even though he isn't the focus, Simba still gets development in the film and isn't shown to be a wise sage like Mufasa, but a guy who's trying to figure everything out as it comes. And that makes him far more relatable. Similarly, I care about Kiara and Kovu's relationship, since, while it has some correlations to what we saw with Simba and Nala, the writers are able to make their bond completely different at the same time. Zira, the antagonist, leading Kovu on to try killing Simba, fits in well as a replacement for Scar, not capturing the same spotlight, but having her own charming villain scenes nonetheless. And this is it, the first direct-to-video movie where all the musical numbers are real musical numbers, and more than alright too. Some of these are absolute bangers. Lullaby is a great, catchy, threatening villain song. We Are One is soothing and provides multiple layers in being calming, but showing imagery of how Simba's worldview could be limiting. And that one where everyone casts Kovu out of Pride rocks straight slaps. I really feel the emotions in that scene. And though in most cases I'd be ranting and raving about how much I dislike the liar reveal trope, this movie earns its reveal, and the reaction amplifies the themes greatly, which are as strong as they could possibly be in one of these movies. In Lion King 1, the Outlands were a sort of rarely mentioned topic, basically only serving as an explanation for why Scar had a hyena army at his side, but now it's been transformed to represent so much more. The barrier between the Pride Lands and Outlands now serves as a metaphor for segregation, the conflict between two groups showing the process of indoctrination, hatred, discrimination, and prejudice of many based on the actions of few. And here's the thing, unlike Pocahontas, where they straight up say, "They're different from us, which means they must be evil," Lion Lion King 2 is more able to convey this thing they call subtlety. To repeat, Lion King 2, Simba's goddamn pride, has a better, more cohesive allegory and representation of hatred without being ham-fisted than the movie literally about that exact thing. How did they do that? I don't know. It either shows how well written Lion King 2 is as a DVD sequel, or how bad Pocahontas is as a theatrical release. Either way, it's going straight to the top of the list, baby. Dude, an extremely goofy movie is way too good for a direct-to-video film. In fact, I'm barely even gonna consider it one, since calling it a direct-to-video sequel makes it sound cheap or without the same kind of effort the original had, but no. This is an incredibly faithful, good-looking, gripping, true successor to a Goofy movie, and that's coming from a huge fan of the first film. Like the original before it, the film has to do with Max, Goofy's son, reaching another point in his life where he wants more independence. In the first, it was his adolescence, now it's his college years, where he wants to compete in the extreme sports competition, the X Games, which is both very real and done by ESPN, which Disney had recently acquired before the film began production. What really links it in themes, though, is that Goofy gets laid off from his day job, and the only way he can get a new one is with a college degree that he still needs a year of schooling to achieve. So he goes to the exact same school as Max, hoping they can connect while Max is trying to get away from him. And with that kind of description, it's not difficult to see how the two parallel in many aspects, but an extremely Goofy movie has a ton of its own flair and unique qualities that both keep it from being a retread and let it shine as a standalone film. The most prominent difference I can point out at first glance is the perspective and focus change. A Goofy movie is very much the story of Max trying to get along with his dad, being the central main lead and getting a majority of screen time dedicated to him, with Goofy only having a few scenes without Max in the picture, including the iconic hot tub motel scene. As opposed to that, in Extreme, Goofy is far more prevalent, getting several of his own scenes of development, struggle, and growth alongside Max, leading them each to have their own stories to be told while intertwining at certain points, and that makes sense thematically considering how often Max tries to distance himself from Goofy so the two can do their own things. The scenes of them colliding are still there, and it had a direct effect on both their stories, but they feel so different compared to those of the first, in a good way, and part of the reason for that comes down to everyone having developed since the original. One problem that's consistently existed for these direct-to-video movies is that, most of the time, characters don't seem to have improved or changed much from their previous installments. For midquels like the Beauty and the Beast entries, it could be excused to an extent, but Return of Jafar had the problem, Journey to a Newer World had it, and yeah, it makes you think the cast didn't just go through all the shit they did and have remained the exact same people, something that isn't too consistent or realistic, but Extreme is one of the few films that jumps that hurdle. Whereas Max could be more selfish and impulsive in a Goofy movie, and that made sense, he was an adolescent, here he's far more calm, composed, and tries to be nicer to his dad, even when excluding him. You see how the events of the first movie have changed him, and though he's still not perfect, the maturity that comes with him being 19 now makes total sense. Goofy's actions are also relatable, as he was really close to Max as a kid and regained that closeness in a Goofy movie, so him going off to college makes for a perfect setup for Goofy to feel that disconnect again without it being forced. I also love the idea that Goofy has a reason for trying to push Max so hard in school, having a failing job from never getting a degree and wanting Max to have better. That's totally something I could see Goofy doing. And like I said, his link with Max in this is continually intriguing and allows for you to see both sides of the argument at different points in your life. Being someone around Max's age, I relate to him a ton, but I also understand Goofy's perspective, knowing how he acted in the first movie and how he's depicted here, which, in both cases, make me want to root for him just as much as Max. He tries studying hard to reach his goals, he meets a dorky librarian named Cynthia that he starts a wholesome relationship with, and he still wants to connect with his son. Of course, the over-the-top senior villain unintentionally puts a wrench in that leading up to the X Games, making Goofy lose his focus for a time, but there's never a moment he isn't in character and lovable. And side note, I really love the villain designs. It's like the perfect mix between the regular Disney art style and the art for real-life celebrities, where it isn't in that uncanny valley section, but it makes for some good expressions. The same is true of Max, who's understandable in not wanting his dad to interfere during a time where he should be coming into his own alongside his friends, which just so happens to also include the X Games. Now, it'd almost be too easy to make fun of the radical late 90s to early 2000s skateboarding culture that brought us such series as Rocket Power, but Extreme never goes into that territory and remains fun without showing off too hard. Though the skateboarding animation, as well as in general, looks spot on as a sequel to the original. They even fit in one of those iconic dream sequences like Max had. Clearly, so much effort was put into making this a good movie, and I'd say it's great, not only as a sequel, not only as a direct-to-video movie, but as a film. Go watch it whenever you can, I'm putting it at the top of the list. If there was one way I could categorize this movie, it would be by saying that it's exactly what you'd expect from a direct-to-DVD movie. Like, if you knew nothing about Disney, about their large catalog of sequels, all that, and you were asked to describe what a direct-to-DVD sequel to a classic animated film looked like, this would be it. Ariel and Prince Eric have gotten married and had a daughter, planning to show her the world of the merpeople as well as the human world. But hold on a second! Ursula, the villain of the previous film, had a completely separate, always existing, definitely not thought of on the fly, very clearly set up to have existed sister, Morgana, and she's crazy. And that would kind of imply that Ursula wasn't crazy, but hey, you say potato, I say tomato, tomato, potato, blah! So with Morgana being out there, longing for Triton's trident as Ursula did, and yes, that is what she said, Ariel and Eric decide the most logical option is to keep Melody from the sea and never let her know about her heritage or connection to the ocean. I mean, like, logically, that's the best solution. Logically. Okay, it fucking isn't. No, it is not. So let me get this straight. There's an evil presence out there that's looking for the trident who's threatened to harm Melody in the process, and you're just not gonna tell her about any of that, huh? Okay, well, I've got one question. Really, it's a singular broad question linking to a bunch of follow-up questions, but yeah, why? Like, what benefit does that bring you? Looking at the story's events, Melody questions who she is and goes looking out in the ocean. Morgana finds her first, tricks her into stealing the trident from Triton, and then there's a big fight at the end to get it back. So, insane a question, I know. But doesn't it look like, if you told her even the most basic shit about any of this, she wouldn't have fallen for Morgana's trap and helped her get the trident? Because from my perspective, it seems like, if you told her where she was from, who her grandfather was, who Morgana was, etc., this whole fucking movie wouldn't have existed. So riddle me this, Batman! Why didn't you tell her? Better yet, if you weren't gonna tell her, why would you let her know that she can talk to fish and crabs and shit like that? Did you think she'd never question that? Or at the least you didn't think that knowing she can talk to fish, she would try talking to others? Or even more at the least, did you ever consider that as long as you lived by the ocean, no matter how big the wall you might build,
ooh, that's kind of small,
she'd still find a way to get to it? Did anyone think this decision through at all? How stupid are you people? You know, other than that aspect, the movie is fine. It's not offensively terrible or anything. Songs are forgettable but fine, the animation is nice, the voice acting is good, the villain is fine, if not a retread of Ursula. Just a bit more pathetic, but I can't overlook this. It's so glaringly obvious that the writers didn't think this implication or reasoning through in the slightest, so it takes this inoffensive whatever movie and makes it both insufferable to genuinely watch and hilarious to make fun of. For ironic value alone, I'll put it above Journey to a New World, but below Enchanted Christmas. Lady and the Tramp among Disney films is for sure one of the most low-key of them, and by that I don't mean it's bad, not by a long shot. Truth be told, I have a certain fondness for animated movies that have the ability to slow down or be less extreme. Seeing cool visuals and constant action has its charms, but above that, I like movies that know when to linger on scenes, ideas, or whatever, and allow the audience to really take it in. One of my favorite Disney movies is Fox and the Hound, so that should tell you a little bit about my feelings for Lady and the Tramp. Whenever I watch it, I can't help but get lost in its laid-back, almost sort of elegant presentation, and with how fast-paced most Disney DVD movies are, whether for better or for worse, I was a bit worried they weren't going to get that atmosphere, but no, I think they succeeded. The film stars Scamp, one of Lady and Tramp's 4 children who briefly appeared at the end of the original, being unfulfilled with his current life and longing to live like a junkyard dog with no responsibilities. When he finds a way to leave, however, the junkyard dogs he idolizes want to take him through several tests, slowly making him rethink the decision as Scamp falls in love with another dog named Angel and his family looks for him. Like I said, all the major plot points and such are restrained to the small town the dogs live in, but there's nothing wrong with that, and this is clearly more reliant on being character-driven, and Scamp's adventure has a large cast to use to its advantage. Not gonna lie, at first I thought I was going to hate Scamp, constantly talking about wanting to be a junkyard dog, not appreciating what he has and all that, but I don't know, it might be Stockholm Syndrome, but I found myself really relating more and more with him as the movie went on. He's got a certain charm to him, though I gotta say it's very different from the charm that Tramp had in the original. Part of it probably comes down to to his innocence. Yeah, he's rambunctious and likes to act full of himself, but for a majority of his time acting that way, it's been being humbled or falling on his face. And that's the entire point, for him to learn to do better, so I couldn't find myself hating him. Another good reason for me growing to like Scamp came in his relationship with Angel, who makes for the perfect foil to him, being agile and used to the streets, but wishing she could be in a stable family, having already been abandoned by 5. Basically, she's the exact opposite of Scamp, and wants what he has just as much as he wants what she has. So the two clash over what's really important, amidst moments of growing closer to one another, and something about how they interact is so juvenile and fun. Doing stuff for the thrill of it, playing around with nothing else to do, that sort of thing. There's really no better example of how its mood deviates from Lady and the Tramp than the recreation of the spaghetti scene, where Scamp and Angel don't even try to be all romantic or civil and just want to have fun. As I mentioned, little moments are given time to linger on, and that seriously helps develop the film's overarching relationships. Speaking on another attribute I thought I was going to hate, there's Tramp's conflict with Scamp. Having grown up to be a more civil-minded, strict house pet than the rascal he was before, Tramp has tried his best to steer Scamp away from the junkyard lifestyle, and in doing so, the tensions between the two have gotten high. In the beginning, Tramp was pretty aggressive with Scamp and trying to get him to change, which is what I worried would be a prominent aspect of his screen presence, but Tramp grows to regret his actions and lets Scamp figure out what he wants to be on his own, something I don't think we see enough in these kinds of movies. In most kids' media I've seen, during times where they act out or feel lost in who they want to be, parental figures are almost always seen as the beacons of light to help them get back on the tracks, but sometimes it takes personal experience to really get some aspect of life that kids otherwise couldn't understand. So seeing that idea represented was refreshing to say the least. Other than that though, most of the secondary cast doesn't get too much focus. Lady surprisingly does almost nothing in the story beyond telling Tramp to be less harsh. The sisters are there, but that's about it. The junkyard dogs themselves are distinct, but only Angel and the antagonist, a stray that's got beef with Tramp, Buster, are given a good amount of screen time, but I don't have an issue with that. The characterization around the 3 sisters was enough to make me see they were different, each of the junkyard dogs were enjoyable and had a distinct personality, and Lady doesn't need to be more than emotional support when Scamp and Tramp are the main focus. As a whole, it's just a pleasant, sort of comfort foodie experience. It's not great per se, but you could turn it on at any time and have fun just like you could with the original, and it does well in achieving what it wanted to do. I'm gonna be putting it below King of Thieves, but above Enchanted Christmas. Another movie that does exactly what you'd expect, and for the most part, it's all kinda tedious. The mice are wanting to make a storybook full of news stories from Cinderella's life, so we get 3 smaller stories about them, and they're fine. They're alright. What do you want me to say? There's not that much there. It's clear this was actually intended as a movie instead of a failed TV show since the animation quality is too professional, but it's got stories like Cinderella isn't accustomed to living in the castle and all the intricacies of it, but she learns to be herself, and what if Jacques, the mouse, decided he wanted to be a human for a while so he could help out Cinderella? Not the most engaging stuff. If I were to pick my favorite out of the 3 shown, the one centering around Anastasia, Cinderella's stepsister, was by far the best. Evil stepmother is trying to get her girls high-class nobility for the upcoming ball, something that almost definitely will not happen, but Anastasia falls for a baker in town, and Cinderella decides to help her. There's nothing all too complex about it, but seeing another side of Anastasia is nice, and she comes off as way more of a 3-dimensional person than she was in the original. It's cute, solid 6 out of 10, but the rest of the movie is so boring and it's the last short, so if I ever decided to watch this again, I'd skip ahead to there and not watch any of the others. Unless you're wondering whether or not the storybook is finished, it is. There's not really any reason to watch this all the way through. Check out the Anastasia skit if you want, that's the best you're gonna get. Below Return of Jafar, but just above the bottom of the list. I should preface what I have to say here by letting you know that I consider Hunchback of Notre Dame to be one of my favorite movies of all time. It carries heavy themes of discrimination, religious persecution, identity, lust, passion, exiling from society, power, corruption, and so much more in its 97-minute time frame. Each character, whether it be the sympathetic dreamer abused for his looks Quasimodo, the outcast, persecuted, and kind-hearted Esmeralda, the lovable, morally strong, righteous Captain Phoebus, or more than any of them, the complex, convictional, unapologetically cruel villain Judge Claude Frollo, all have such memorable interactions and developments, making for a transcendental, timeless story. Despite distinctively being set so long ago, it toppled stereotypes about Disney storytelling, subverted expectations in the greatest of ways, opened discussions like many movies before it never had, and 26 years later, it's still one of the greatest looking movies I've ever seen. And the gargoyles were there too. Yeah, if people who've seen and loved the movie have ever had one complaint that's always stuck around, it's the inclusion of 3 talking gargoyle statues that, while originally thought to be purely in Quasimodo's mind, are shown to be real, and it's not something I like much either. In truth, there's barely any focus on them at all, but it was and still is seen as artistically compromising for the purpose of inspiring less controversy and making money, and that's what Hunchback 2 is to a fault. If you've ever seen Hunchback, how would you describe it in terms of atmosphere? Grand, massive in scale, operatic, bold, all things that are much more difficult to pull off with a small budget like Hunchback 2 has, but it appears the team isn't going down that route. Let me explain. Hunchback 2 follows Quasimodo and co. several years after the events of the original movie when the circus comes to town, and along with it, thieves out to steal a giant bell, La Fidèle. So as Phoebus tries to figure out who's been causing the surge in robberies, Quasi falls in love with one of the act's performers, Madeline, and shit proceeds to hit the fan. Everything about that description screams lazy cash grab with no respect for what the original was about or why it existed, and watching the thing gives you the exact same feeling. Phoebus has gone from the voice of reason among a sea of discriminatory, unquestioning guards to being immediately hostile towards the carnies, and sure, he ends up being right, but the fact he was so apprehensive about them from the beginning completely contradicts his previously established morals. Quasi and Esmeralda are about the same as they were before, and the new love interest Madeline is fine, I guess, but Esmeralda and Phoebus's kid, Zephyr, is kind of annoying and only exists to add tension to the final climax. And then there was Sarouche, the villain. Oh, Sarouche, you did not try that hard to win my hatred, and it shows. Sarouche is a typical narcissistic con man. He looks beautiful on the outside, but is shown to actually be ugly. He manipulates Madeline and throws her under the bus, whatever, but he's an insult of a villain when you think of him in comparison to Frollo. For some of the other movies, an antagonist like Sarouche might work fine, but there's no way to top Frollo in ideology, viciousness, calculated planning, any of that. He pales in comparison no matter what, and even if he was a good villain, which he really isn't, the guy is completely generic. He'd stand no chance. And so if in a sequel to one of the grandest films ever, you focus on a small town crook trying to steal a bell, of course it'll suck. Of course people won't like it. Of course it will feel like a cash grab because it is. And I almost forgot to mention what's special about the bell in the first place. Are you ready for this? Because I'm not sure you are. The reason Sarouche wants the bell is because, get this, though it looks like an ordinary bell on the outside, the inside is adorned with lots of jewels and other expensive, fragile shit. You see, it's a metaphor for beauty being on the inside, and I don't think the writers of this know what bells are meant for. Kinda embarrassing when your main man is a bell ringer, but let me give you a little audio-visual representation of what would happen if you tried to ring a bell like La Fidèle. Dong. That's my impression of shattering glass. I hope you enjoyed it. But anyway, yeah, that should give you a basic picture of why the concept makes no sense. And beyond the metaphorical meaning, what practical use does spending a ton of money on something no one will see have? Seems like the architect for this thing thought about as much about it as the writers did for this movie's themes. You wanna know what the most recognizable ideas in this are? Don't lie. Be good. Stealing things is bad. Love can come from anywhere.
Ugly people never win!
Man, it feels like I'm back at the Festival of Fools, where everything is upside down and a masterpiece is turned to complete shit. The only difference here is that the Festival of Fools lasted for one day and this movie is forever. Sorry if I'm coming off as harsh here, but I hate this film's very fucking existence. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, more than any of the other films so far, did not need a sequel. Not only for being unnecessary and counterintuitive to the decisive ending of the original, that almost goes without saying, but a sequel, especially a direct-to-DVD sequel, could never in a million years match the scope, production, or pure quality that Hunchback 1 had. And I'm so uncomfortable with the fact I have to call it Hunchback 1, since in my mind, there is no sequel. As a matter of fact, yeah, that's right. What sequel? I don't see a sequel. That doesn't exist, and you can't make me believe it does. I'm not listening. It's not there. Bottom of the list. Bye. Oh my god, this movie is way too charming for its own good. Picking up pretty much immediately after the events of 101 Dalmatians, it follows Patch, one of the name puppies from the original, feeling unspecial among a family of 98 siblings and trying to prove himself by getting on his favorite TV show. Meanwhile, Corella gets into art and devises a devious plan involving a new modern artist character voiced by Martin Short. I gotta say, Patch's psychological dilemma throughout the movie of being inferior, makes sense. It would stand to reason that among so many that look almost exactly like them, at the least one of the puppies would feel like both an outcast and unspecial at the same time. And Patch really nails that conflict. You sympathize with him by saying he's far more than just another one of the pups like he was in the original. And I should mention it's easier to see him as a kid when he's actually voiced by a child actor, and a good one at that. Unlike Scant's Adventure, where an at the time 32-year-old man played the title character very noticeably.
It's great, Dad. The junkyard dogs have taught me all the tricks.
Yeah, that was a bit uncomfortable, but Patch's expressive voice adds to his personality, making for a really likable protagonist, and it was fun getting to know him more through his interests, including his fanboyish obsession with Thunderbolt, who's basically a more self-aware version of Bolt before Bolt came out. Kinda almost makes you wonder if Bolt got some inspiration from here, considering his name is just an abbreviation of Thunderbolt, but whatever, he's great too. The writers really hit the fine line between conceited Hollywood star and genuinely nice person from the beginning, so I was never annoyed by him being on screen. You can tell he's not a bad-meaning guy, just overconfident and unaware, and his partnership with Patch works surprisingly well. I thought it was very well executed. The reason they're hanging out is that Thunder's sidekick, who turns out to be a surprise villain, though not that surprising, told him that his character was going to be killed off in the next episode. So Thunder goes out to try doing heroic deeds for the press, but needs someone to tell him what to do. And Patch, as a massive fan who's memorized all the episodes of his TV show, is perfect for helping him. By that alone, you might assume Thunder is devious and sneaky, but no, it never comes off that way. Sure, it's got the regular liar revealed trope about an hour in, but it's clear from the start that Thunder had no ill intent and wanted to live up to Patch's expectations. He's never mean or hard on Patch at all. The two are really supportive of one another, and that makes the liar reveal moment actually emotional. Like, for once, I felt something with this trope, and I can't remember the last time that happened. They don't linger too long on it either. You feel what the writers intend, and then they both move on without too hard of feelings, as Patch is shocked at first, but forgives Thunder pretty quickly when he shows himself to truly care. All in a way that isn't predictable. Another thing these kinds of movies usually don't know how to handle. There's no slacking in the villain department either. Cruella is just as amazingly psychotic in this as she was before, becoming obsessed with an artist who paints dots, and after feeling like he's not making anything too inspired, decides the best thing to do would be trying to steal the puppies again so she can use their coats as a canvas. That is delightfully insane, not to mention creative. I love it. She's got the exact same kind of screen presence she did in the original, and it's almost like, with the events of the original in mind, she's become a bit more unhinged since her reputation has gone down, no longer caring as much about putting up a front. It adds an unexpected element to her dynamic with the artist, Lars, who has to be my favorite character of the movie. His voice is so exaggerated and out there compared to his usually pretty calm face, making for a stark contrast to Cruella that leads to several hilarious scenes with him. Much like the movie itself, he's got several qualities I didn't think I was going to see, but he's so charming and funny that I can't help but find myself immediately entertained by him. Listen to him speak, he's got so much humorous personality.
Did you see that? Did you see that? How could you do such a thing to the cute little puppy? And then she says, no, you must kill them. And I'm not so sturdy. She's very mean to me.
Like I said, I think he's a good representative for the film, since it has so many elements that caught me off guard, but in a positive way. The visuals are so different from other Disney direct-to-video sequels, it's outstanding. It's colorful, but not oversaturated, the lines are clean and digital, but in a way that mirrors the original scratchiness. The backgrounds, while clearly computer done, do a great job capturing the painted New Yorker atmosphere of the first. The character designs have slight changes, but not in a way that could be seen as negative, and there's a minimal usage of CG, mostly on cars, but it looks well blended with the 2D environments and doesn't distract you from the rest of the movie. Plus, the expressions are top-notch, including on the dogs. I don't know who or why, but this feels like a passion project by someone. In stark contrast to movies like Cinderella 2, Pocahontas 2, or Little Mermaid 2, where they all look fine but don't stick out among one another, especially in presentation. There are little touches in Patch's London Adventure, like the creative Dot's opening title sequence, the newspaper ending sequence, two-dimensional goons like Jasper and Horace having more distinctive interests, and so on, that let you know how much care was put into the production. Most direct-to-DVD Disney sequels don't even try, starting with a fade-in title at whatever point and then having a blank, boring credit sequence on a boring color palette. So having the slightest change was really easy to see since something was happening. This is one that you should definitely check out, whether you know the original or not, as it stands as its own thing just as much as it does as a sequel. I'm putting it right below an extremely goofy movie. For clarity's sake, this is another TV show compilation movie with scenes interspersed to tie it all together into a sort of movie narrative, but it does a much better job at connecting its events than Belle's Magical World ever could. If you know anything about Atlantis though, which you probably don't, it should be obvious why the series was never greenlit. Commercially, the film it's based on looks like it did okay, but in reality, it was nowhere near enough to warrant any further projects. A thing you should know about movies is that, generally, for them to break even and be considered a success, they need to make at least double their production budget. So while while Atlantis may look like it's a modest hit on paper, it seriously underperformed expectations and didn't do wonders for the studio, so them canceling a planned sequel and TV show would only be expected, and that's kind of a shame since, unlike Belle's Magical World, Milo's Return shows the makings of an interesting movie spin-off cartoon, and while I will be judging it as a movie since that's how it's packaged, as a TV show, I think it's got some value. The plot of the movie is that Kida, the Princess of Atlantis, whose father died in the film, is thinking about whether or not she should continue to harness the powers of the crystal, which, other than giving her people long life, provides them with technology they long chose not to use, but that also includes dormant weapons her father made in an attempt to harness the crystal's power, so she's unsure of what to do. To get a better understanding of what the crystal is doing, she goes with Milo, the young 1910s explorer and protagonist of the film, as well as a large cast of mercenaries, to spots on Earth where the crystals are causing chaos, deciding in the end whether she'll continue to use the power or send her people back into a period of safe isolation under the sea. And if you want to know the actual idea behind the TV show, it's about Milo, Kida, and crew going and solving supernatural issues around the world, whether they're caused by the crystal or not. Yeah, the narrative of it solely being about the crystal's effects is kinda numbed when the first segment has to do with a mind-controlling kraken completely separate from Atlantis, but I digress. Disregarding the more makeshift movie aspects and looking at the stories individually, each segment has some nice world building. They usually have to do with other cultures intertwined with Atlantis, so we get brief descriptions and explanations of cultures, and that adds something that most other Monster of the Week shows don't do. A lot of the time, they'll just be like, "Wow, a chupacabra. We all know what that is, don't we?" But each Atlantis segment gives factual information on myths and legends surrounding the cultures they're looking at. It's a nice touch and lets the audience know that the writers understand what they're referencing. It also helps to explain the pretty creative worlds and set pieces they come up with. The leads, generally composed of the main cast of the film, are still as likable as they were originally, and if there was one bit from the film that needed to be done right, it was that. Something most fans of the movies agree on is that one of its greatest attributes is its characters, and the shame about the movie is that we never get to focus that much on too many of them since the main story is revolving around Milo and Kida, but the TV episodes lean more into those personalities, and it works well. Every one of them is distinct and memorable, having recognizable characteristics, interests, goals, and mostly equal screen time. You can also tell the writers are trying to not make the same mistakes they did with the film, limiting each episode to have only so many members of the cast involved, as that makes the narrative smoother and less like each of them is fighting for your attention. Not much else to say, it's perfectly serviceable, though thinking of it as a film it's pretty meh and doesn't make too much sense. If you like the movie, you'll like this. It's more content for Atlantis, and realistically, this is all you're ever going to get. If there's one positive I can give this movie right off the bat, it's that it gets to the point and is blessedly short, rolling credits before even reaching an hour. And that's partially because it may technically be a movie, but really it's more so an extended first episode of the TV show. If you don't know what the premise of that is, Stitch, now living with Nani and Lilo, has to track down all other 625 experiments that came before him, who all have their own unique powers to try finding uses for. And Stitch the movie pretty much introduces how that happened. But besides giving more exposition than an average episode of the show, being around 3 times as long and having to do specifically with the origin of why all Stitch's cousins are on Earth now, it follows the typical formula of any given episode. Lilo and Stitch find an experiment and think about what its best purpose is, Jumba and Peaksley provide comedic relief, Bubbles and Nani yell at Lilo for going off to do dangerous shit, and the new villain, Dr. Hamsterville, yells again too for being an idiot or complains about being short. Cycle, rinse, repeat. There's not anything all too wrong with the formula, it works fine for the TV show and doesn't drag here, but it feels a little weird reviewing this to begin with as a Disney sequel when it serves a pretty functionally different purpose. In all honesty, it's the kind of film I was dreading to find in this marathon. It isn't that amazing in any interesting way, but not bad either, so I barely got anything to say about it. I guess it'll go right below Milo's Return since it does what it wants to in a perfectly respectable fashion, it just doesn't stand out. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to be doing Leroy and Stitch either because that's basically the finale to the TV show. I'm calling it now. Lion King 1.5 has to be the most different out of all the Disney direct-to-video sequels, past or upcoming, for a couple of key distinguishing factors. It's a midquel in that it tells a story going on at around the same time as the first movie's story, since it includes new scenes and moments with Simba during his time skip and Timon before the original begins, but it also falls into a completely different subgenre called a sidequel, meaning it tells the original story but from the perspective of someone in the secondary or potentially tertiary cast. In case you were wondering, yes, sidequels are far more more rare than midquels, which were in themselves rather obscure, so I'm unsure if there are any other movies in the public conscious that count for this denomination other than this. I honestly thought it was a concept completely reserved to TV. That's not all it is either. At various points in the film, we get to see Timon and Pumbaa making commentary about what's going on, Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. So it's also technically a review as well as a parody. And so how does it do it all those things? I'll tell you this, it could have been a whole lot worse. Lion King 1.5 follows the comedic relief and father figures to Simba after his biological father died, Timon and Pumbaa, as they describe their own adventures up to meeting Simba and how their lives were affected afterwards. On the front of the songs, something Lion King is incredibly well known for, there's only a single new number here, and that makes sense with how Timon and Pumbaa are constantly walking through other songs from the first movie, but the film's only new song, Dig a Hole, it's pretty catchy. It's not as polished or well done as any of the Lion King songs, but it's better than like 80% of direct-to-video sequel songs in that it has good production and a nice hook that sticks in your mind after you watch it, so that's an achievement unto itself. At first I was a bit iffy about whether or not the duo of Timon and Pumbaa could keep an engaging plot as comic relief, but they get moments of humanization to show their more down-to-earth sides. And while the comedy was more present here than in most direct-to-video sequels, it was never invasive during times when it wasn't needed. Particularly, there are moments with Simba shine in my eyes as hitting the balance between comedy and seriousness, enduring us more to their friendship both here and retroactively in the first movie, one of the few positive impacts a midquel could have. The film's also just funny without trying too hard, and hey, Pumbaa only farts like once in the whole thing, and that might not sound impressive, but considering that's one of the easiest jokes to do with him, their restraint made me feel respected in some way, even if only for a little bit. The jokes relating to how they caused half the movie's crises were fun too. When I saw them in the canyon, I actually thought they were going to show some moment where Timon and Pumbaa caused the wildebeest to kill Mufasa, but I thought that was maybe a little too dark for them. Other characters like Timon's mom also provide decent comedy and don't overstay their welcome, mostly remaining in the background and coming forward when they need to. And while we're on the idea of that, at first I thought the movie should have gone more all out on the Mystery Science Theater parody aspect, maybe having the two commentate on the movie the entire way through, but then I realized it could have easily been annoying, and one of the great things about MST3K is that you can watch the movies they make fun of on their own for yourself. So having that kind of commentary over the whole movie would have been ballsy, but ultimately would have taken away more than it could add. For that reason, I think the movie theater sections were handled well, and the bit about other Disney icons showing up at the end was also entertaining. It's not something I'd actively buy, pick out, and watch if I was having a boring day, but if it came on TV or my younger brother was watching, I'd have a decent enough time. I'll place it above Enchanted Christmas, but below Scamp's Adventure. Among the few Disney sequels I had heard about going into this, Mulan 2 was always one held up as being far worse than most. I kept hearing about how incredibly terrible and insulting and enraging the thing was, so as a massive fan of the original Mulan, it made me interested to see what ways this movie was so dislikable, and I didn't hate it all that much. Actually, there are several aspects I quite like. That's not to say there aren't some massive issues, but I guess I should just get into it. The film follows Mulan and Shang, having just been engaged, guarding a caravan of 3 princesses on the way to an arranged marriage to unite 2 factions of China against the Mongols. But Yao, Ling, and Chen Po, the 3 soldier friends of Mulan in the first movie, also tag along and start falling in love. Mushu, clearly not voiced by Eddie Murphy, also tags along in hopes of breaking up Mulan and Shang, having been told that he'll lose his pedestal and job after they get married. Right off the bat, I can nail the #1 problem in this film, and it's something everyone with a brain who's seen this has pointed out. Mushu's motivation and actions are incredibly petty and unlikable. He spends all his time for a majority of the film trying to break up Mulan and Shang to varying degrees of success. And while the movie points that fact out and seems to be self-aware of how bad it is, him still doing it does a disservice to how he was originally characterized. I can kinda see what the writers were going for with this approach, since in the first movie he went after Mulan to get glory for himself, as well as to cover for his screw-up of breaking the Great Stone Dragon. But even if he had some selfish motivations behind that decision, he did end up helping and inspiring Mulan while providing a mirror image between her and himself, adding to that movie's themes, whereas here, he's got nowhere near the same level of charm or purpose besides stirring up fights. The only other reason he's there is to give a deus ex machina for why the princesses don't have to marry politically, and that makes me wonder why Mulan couldn't have come up with that simple idea beforehand. I also hate how the writers shoehorned in some bullshit rule to make Mushu think he has to do this to keep his pedestal. The reason he lost it in the first place was for doing such a bad job helping the Foz during times of crisis. So even if a new guardian came in from Shang Shang's family, why would Mushu lose his pedestal again? It's not like he's the only guardian, there were several. At worst, Shang's family guardian replacing Mushu would mean he wouldn't help Mulan anymore and he'd go back to being a statue until awoken again. That wouldn't mean he'd lose his pedestal. And they predictably go back on it by the end of the film anyway, so why do I even bother? Other than that and Mushu's actions though, I can't say I truly despise anything else in the movie. The stereotypical rom-com circle of the love interest stopping a wedding is a bit groan-worthy, and Mulan and Shang's arguing, while entertaining it for the animation alone, felt generic and underdeveloped, but I wasn't enraged by it like a lot of other people are, and they're not really the main focus, so I could at least sort of get over it in service of the positives. What I mean by that is I love the interactions and moments between the soldiers and princesses. To me, they saved the movie from being mostly negative. Each of the princesses has a distinctive personality and mannerisms that match up well to their respective soldier counterparts, making the chemistry between them way more organic. Their feelings are also given plenty of time to linger and blossom, continually building as the film progresses without focusing too much on one over another. Each is equally important in the narrative, and that means each couple gets cute moments to show why they work together. You could call it corny or dumb if you like, but in my viewing it was a pleasant surprise, and I liked watching them have fun. By nature, the soldiers are all enjoyable in their own ways, so having more of them wasn't an issue to me. In one of the reviews that I saw ranting about this back in the day, I vividly remember Doug Walker being super upset that romance was a bigger focus than action here, which is a fair point, but I didn't come in with high standards, so I thought the relationship stuff was fine. It still isn't all that good of a movie, don't get me wrong, but I found myself thinking it was more okay than most made it out to be. The perfect way to describe this movie would be confused, since it doesn't seem to fully know what it wants to do, so instead of sticking to one concept and going with that, it throws as many at the wall as possible to see what sticks. In the beginning, it's about Tarzan being presumed dead, and overhearing the apes thinking his mom is better off without him, so he runs away. That specific version of the concept barely gets brought back up until the very end of the movie. Then, Tarzan runs into this group of violent apes trapped in a mountain. After a 5-minute segment, they aren't even referenced for another 20. So by the time they did get brought back up, I'd completely forgotten they were there. Then it's about Tarzan finding this old grumpy ape and trying to figure out what he is, and that's what the movie sticks with the longest, but still, the other concepts get in the way of fleshing that one out more, so by the end, while the story has technically reached a conclusion, there are still several unanswered questions and unresolved conflicts. And speaking of which, the violent ape family has to be one of the most underwhelming antagonist groups out of all of these. What do they do exactly? They're mean, they mess with the main characters, they kind of rough up Zugor's home and say they'll do more, but then they don't cause the mom character falls in love with Zugor, and that's the end. Like, they don't do much of anything throughout the entire film or even provide an ever-present looming threat. They're just there and don't add much at all before leaving and confirming they were a waste of time. It could have been done completely without them and given more room for Zugor and Tarzan's friendship, something that worked and felt decently explored, though there could have been more of it. You see, Zugor is a lonely, unfriendly ape voiced by George Carlin, who, for the record, they could have taken way more advantage of in having him as a voice.
Shit, piss, fuck, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Ball bag, hard on, piss hard, blue balls, taint, nookie, snatch.
But whatever. The point is, he and Tarzan bond over their shared affection for their parents and outcast status, forming a pact of sorts. It's nice and wholesome, but they have to go and fuck it up with an unearned third act falling out segment before he predictably comes back. I've mentioned a few other instances of this trope being used, but in this case I think it was very much unnecessary, like several other additions. Tarzan's friends, Turk and Tontor, also get more screen time than they did in the first movie, and they aren't annoying or anything, but all I see them as is another break from Zugor and Tarzan's on-screen chemistry. There are so many more ways a lot of this film's issues could have been amended easily, like having Tontor and Turk with Tarzan from the start, making the violent apes more present and memorable, etc., but they don't do that, so it comes off way more as a first draft. And that's weird when the production values look pretty high, incorporating some of the same techniques as the theatrical release. I'll give it this, it's got a ton more good to say about it than Mulan 2, so right below Scamp's Adventure. Watching this has helped me a ton in realizing why I thought Stitch the movie was so okay and nothing more. It focused way too much on the alien aspect and not as much on the family dynamic of Lilo and Stitch. Yeah, there's plenty of sci-fi action, spaceship chases, and whatnot, but just like The Incredibles isn't only a superhero movie, Lilo and Stitch is way more than an alien blockbuster. It's about Lilo and Nani, two sisters who've lost their parents that are trying their best to support each other but don't really know how to in such a broken family until Stitch and the others show up and inadvertently start mending it. element. And so sort of as a balance to Stitch the movie, Stitch Has a Glitch goes all in on the family element, though it also incorporates some sci-fi functions. Lilo is getting ready to participate in a hula show that her mom won back in the day when she was a kid, but out of nowhere Stitch starts glitching out. Later revealed to be because when Jumbo was making Stitch, he didn't fully charge his molecular structure, making him unstable. This causes tension between Stitch and Lilo, who start falling apart at the seams, and at the same time there's also a subplot about Nani and David attempting to date, but that isn't quite as important. The main storyline does a much better job than the previous film of capturing the original's general vibe and mood, containing more realistic moments of Lilo, Stitch, and Nani all stirring in anger, thinking, figuring out what they should do and whatnot. It's all way more subdued than Stitch the movie, and keeps its conflicts smaller in scope, but just as important, and that makes for a key difference in overall presentation. Lilo and Stitch's tension as the freakouts get worse felt incredibly real and justified, matching the sort of uncomfortable atmosphere you got from when Lilo tried to say she didn't want Stitch in the original's climax. It matches the spirit a whole lot more than Stitch the movie, which doesn't try going for that same emotional element or slow burn of unease. I was also fond of the extra emotional theme of feeling like the only way to impress someone that's already dead is through accomplishing the same things as them. That's a very real idea that a lot of people try to play out, and it makes Lilo's actions trying to get it perfect more valid. The only bits I don't really like about the story are that 1, if Jumba had told the family what was happening with Stitch, it might not have prevented all that happened, but it would have kept Stitch from thinking he turned bad again, and it would have kept Lilo from thinking the same for a short period. It's a major plot hole, and I can kind of overlook it since the drama and tension created from it is also good, but I can't get over the fact that the movie ends with Stitch presumably being dead, then he comes back to life, and when asked how that's possible, Jumba's only response is that it isn't. And that's the end of the movie. We never get an explanation, implication, fucking innuendo about why he just completely had his problems vanish. Nope, he's fine because friendship brought him back to life and all the tears of the Pokemon rejuvenated him and a single teardrop fell on his face, making him wake up slowly. Fuck you. I hate it, hate it, hate it when movies do that. And they knew it was bullshit in this since they didn't even try to come up with an explanation. It's basically telling us, yeah, it is what it is. We couldn't come up with an emotional resolution, so here's some artificial drama. And that sucks, because the rest of the movie is pretty good, including the side plot stuff with Pleakley and David. I thought that was cute. And Lilo and Stitch's friendship was explored in a way that I found endearing and heartwarming. What I'm saying with all this is that the ending leaves a bitter taste in my mouth on an otherwise pretty good experience. I'm still putting it above Scamp's Adventure, but not King of Thieves. This was another sequel I got told was one of the worst out of the lot, and I don't understand why that's the case. I love The Emperor's New Groove about as much as I love Hunchback, though for completely separate reasons. So, like Mulan 2, I came into this thinking it'd be offensively bad, and nope, not really, it was just meh. Sidestepping away from Kuzco, the film's first mistake, it decides to focus on Kronk, the henchman of Yzma voiced by Patrick Warburton, as he gets ready for a visit from his father, whom he only wants the approval of. But the things he said he had are now gone, so after telling the stories of how he got those things in the first place, he has to come up with a way to show his dad that he's got everything he needs to be respected. I had a few expectations going into the movie. It wouldn't be funny, wouldn't be clever, would drag for too long, and it wouldn't capture the essence of the first movie. What I didn't expect was another 3-segment connected vignette-style film like Cinderella 2, since I guess at first I assumed they had an idea for a film starring Kronk, but nope, they only had enough for a higher-than-cable TV budget miniseries, and one that's desperately trying to call back to and be the first movie without trying as hard. Something consistent throughout each of the segments was the number of callbacks to The Emperor's New Groove, and not clever ones either. Remember when Yzma pulled up her skirt saying, "You probably didn't expect this," and everyone winced? What if we just did the exact same joke in the exact same way? How about we do a callback to Yzma's original plan of turning Kuzco into a flea? How about we bring back the angels from that one scene and have them show up for no reason several times? How about when Kronk said it was all coming together? How about that? And Kuzco pretty much isn't in the movie at all, but the writers, for whatever reason, still thought it was necessary to have him come in and commentate once every 20 minutes and then get a brief cameo at the end. He has no reason being here besides this being a sequel to Emperor's New Groove and serves as absolute filler, adding nothing at all. If you want him in the story, put him in the story. We didn't need this shit to be entertained. Though the film isn't all that funny, I will give it credit for sort of being able to match the original's energy, but that's about all it does right in that department. The jokes, for the most part, didn't land with me, and that's kind of what I thought would happen. Emperor's New Groove is a hilarious film. So much like matching the grand scope of Notre Dame, doing the same sharp, well-crafted comedy on a shorter time frame would be much more difficult without a talented team of writers. And when your main story is about dressing people up as fake family and having a series of mistakes to comedic effect, something Hey Arnold did 25 years ago, you are fucked. You are fucked! Could have been worse, sure, but Really? These are the best writers you could find? Give me a break. What else is on the menu? Oh, Yzma's back, though not as a cat, which kind of takes away a comedic opportunity already, but that's besides the point. And she gets Kronk to lie about a scam for her? How original! Eartha Kitt, I'm so sorry they didn't do anything better with you. You deserved so much more. And hey, why not give Kronk his own kooky girlfriend like Goofy in an extremely goofy movie, but this time, make her way more forgettable and bland. Disapproving father who looks imposing at first glance but is actually kind of puny? That's what we needed. Exactly what all the fans were asking for. We didn't need Kuzco, one of the funniest aspects of the first movie and the central focus. We barely need Pacha or Yzma. It's all about Kronk, baby, and you're gonna have to deal with it. Except for when the movie wants to remind you that it's a sequel to a popular Disney movie with a well-established cast of characters. Man, that was a long one. Bland mediocrity at its finest, right below Return of Jafar for not inspiring any strong emotions in me. Bambi is one of those movies I appreciate way more than I actually like. If I could give an equivalent, I'd say it's the animated Citizen Kane. It's got several pioneering techniques in animation, it uses mostly visuals to convey its story, it's ahead of its time in terms of messaging, but when I look at it as a film, I kinda just think it's alright. And that goes the same for the midquel. And side note, can we stop calling all these midquels insert movie name 2? That implies it's a continuation of what's going on rather than an expansion of events that weren't originally highlighted, so calling it Bambi 2 or Tarzan 2 or, as we're going to come to know, Fox and the Hound 2, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? But that's just a nitpick. The movie stars Bambi chronologically right after his mother dies in the original, going to live with his mysterious father who thinks he might be too busy or unqualified to raise him, and the rest of the film is just sort of them going through their daily lives in a similar vein to how the original went. First, getting my dislikes out of the way, besides having more the feeling of a mid-2000s movie than the original, which I can excuse for the attempts at atmosphere and recapturing of the original spirit, the one thing I didn't quite agree with was the portrayal of Bambi's father. For comparison's sake, originally, he was kind of an enigmatic force in a way. He was always there and always watching what Bambi did, but he never said almost anything and refrained from showing any strong emotions, making him more intimidating and intriguing as a presence. With that in mind, having a film centered around his relationship to Bambi could lead to one of two outcomes. Either A, his character is expanded in a meaningful way that explores why he acted the way he did in the original and how his parenting style changed Bambi mentally, or B, the reveal of what he's like isn't quite what was expected and the audience is left underwhelmed, and judging by my tone, you can probably guess what camp I'm leaning into. The approach taken to Bambi's father isn't where I thought it would go, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it could have been done better. He plays the stern but unknowledgeable dad who doesn't know how to have fun, but as he hangs out with Bambi, he starts livening up until the inevitable moment where he has to be like, wait, I'm serious, Bambi, you need to be serious, and then Bambi gets mad and rushes off, but he still proves himself to his father, so they talk it out and blah blah blah. I've seen this story told so many times before. They don't tell it badly per se, but okay, here's what I thought Bambi's dad was going to be like. Seeing as he barely spoke in the original, I expected he'd be the same here, only talking when he felt like it was absolutely necessary, therefore subconsciously making the audience wonder when he'll feel the need to do so. This interpretation would also add more to his stern side, not showing weakness in any fashion and attempting to make Bambi understand without needing to say a word. You could still have Bambi constantly trying to get his dad's attention and asking him various questions, but instead of having him outright answering or giving a response, it could have been conveyed through his expressions, body language, and visual symbolism as was done in the original. This would also make for a more unique dynamic between Bambi and his father, as it'd be more likely to not fall into the same tropes the actual film did, still conveying the downsides and potential cruelty to Bambi's father's teaching style without coming off as forced, generic, or inauthentic, and thankfully, the rest of the film doesn't fall into those trappings. Moving to the positive side of things, Bambi 2 does still keep the original's overall pace, tone, atmosphere, and framing through phenomenal art direction to match the first film's dramatic highs and lows. There are some differences, since this was done on a smaller budget comparatively speaking, and with modern computer animation as opposed to cell-based, but the film still gets points for trying and succeeding in some instances of living up to its predecessor. The backgrounds especially capture the original's essence so perfectly while modernizing the look. I love how the snowy landscapes and spring fields are portrayed to make you honestly feel warm or colder. That's a hard thing to capture. And we get to appreciate those landscapes through the just slow enough pace with hints of action to keep it from being bland. And as I've said, a fast pace is fine and all, but getting to slow down and take everything in fits much more with a Bambi midquel than the former. The characters are also all about as they were before, and I didn't mind the new addition of the jerky deer either. He fits surprisingly well into the final product without taking away from the main conflict. I'm gonna put it just above Tarzan 2. So, believe it or not, up till this review, I'd never seen the seminal classic, often fondly remembered Disney film, Brother Bear. I know, how could I have never watched such a classic? But I did just that in service of having proper context, and it was better than I was originally told, but I wouldn't rank it highly in the Disney catalog. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either, and the Phil Collins music kinda ruined the mood in a few scenes and came off as weirdly shoehorned into a film that didn't need it. So having that lukewarm reception to the theatrical release, I didn't have any hopes that a sequel would be any better, though I did want to know how they'd go about a sequel when the first is so self-contained, and for once, I can plainly say that I think the sequel is actually better than the original movie. And I mean, with just how many films I've talked about so far, the fact that I found one that could be classified as better than its predecessor after, 20 films is pretty astonishing. Sure, I don't have too high an opinion of the original in the first place, but that doesn't take away from the achievement. If you don't know the story of Brother Bear, and I'd understand if you didn't, it's about an Inuit hunter named Kenai who hunts down and kills a bear after it's involved in the death of his brother, angering the spirits and turning him into a bear to learn the meaning behind why he shouldn't have done it. Along the way, he meets Coda, a bear cub looking for his mother. Spoiler, it's the bear Kenai killed, it's an obvious twist, but yeah. And they grow closer together throughout the film, eventually leading to Kenai staying as a bear so he can look after Coda. Knowing that, the second film focuses on a girl who knew Kenai as a child, Nita, who's unable to marry someone until the spiritual bond between her and Kenai is broken by burning an amulet at the equinox that he gave her. The problem comes in that she has to do it with him, so she's temporarily given the ability to speak bear, and the three of them set out on a journey. From there, I thought I could map out all the plot events for the film, and for the most part I did, but there were a few curveballs in there to stop it from being too generic. For instance, one of the things I didn't like about the original was Kenai himself, who I thought stayed an annoying, whiny jerk a bit too long to feel satisfied when he finally became a better person, but here he's already gone through that development, so while he's still snarky and clashes with Nita in the beginning, he's nowhere near as hard to watch, and he's more understanding of both her and Coda's feelings as the movie goes on, in contrast to what I thought would happen of him going through the exact same process he did in the first movie, making the themes redundant, and by virtue of Kenai being way more of a pleasing character, his relationship to Coda is far more endearing. Since during the moments of Kenai and Nita getting closer, Coda was shown being dejected and left out, I expected the film would go on the route of him acting jealous and catty and aggressive to Nita to try getting her to back off, but he doesn't do that, and thank God, because I hate that trope with all of my being. Instead, Coda doesn't openly show his feelings about what's going on until he thinks Kenai wants to leave him, running off and needing convincing to come out. Now, this is still a trope in its own way, but Coda's emotions aren't directed at any one person, whether it be Kenai or Nita. He's just upset about the possibility of losing his brother and doesn't know how to react, which is backed up by how he wishes Kenai could be a human again to stay with Nita after the fact. He still cares about both of them and wants Kenai's happiness over his own, which is an admirable trait that gives his character some depth. It helps you see the situation from his point of view while also understanding Kenai, who still clearly never forgets about Coda when talking about what he wants to do. Their brotherly relationship is well established, and I'd argue it's better than the originals by building on the blueprint that movie left behind. And on another note of bonds between characters, though I wouldn't call the one between Kenai and Nita all too special, I was surprised to first see her destroy the amulet at all. I thought there'd be a big emotional moment in which she goes back on doing it and doesn't destroy the amulet, or someone else, maybe Coda, destroys it, but no, she does it herself and doesn't make a big show of it. She does still get changed to a bear in the end, but the breaking from expectations was nice. I'm about as surprised as anyone at this conclusion, but Brother Bear 2 is a fun time, and while not subverting every trope, does just enough to stick out among those that otherwise didn't try. Still going below King of Thieves, but higher than Stitch Has a Glitch. Time for a little JS trivia fact. When I was a little kid, for whatever reason, I never gravitated that much to the Disney Renaissance films. I grew appreciation and love for them as I got older, but when I was small, the Bronze Age of Disney was always my choice for watching. 101 Dalmatians, Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and Fox and the Hound, and by far I loved Fox and the Hound the most. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it, and though I didn't quite understand the themes that well in the beginning, I soon came to understand its message and loved it all the more. And that's when I heard about this midquel, Fox and the Hound 2. You know, as an avid Fox and the Hound historian, I should know that this film shouldn't exist, and I don't just mean that in the cynical, angry internet reviewer way. I mean that when you look at the chronology of the film, the events of this movie should not be possible when taking into account the canon way events happen. The way it went was that Todd, the fox, met Copper, the dog, they became quick best friends for a couple of days, then Copper got chained up for misbehaving, so he couldn't play with Todd, and the day after that, he and Amos the hunter went on a long-ass trip and didn't come back until he was grown. The two didn't spend all too much time together before they were separated for a good period, so therefore, logically, you'd assume there wouldn't be any events left to fill in because there aren't. They found a way though, like they always do, and so knowing the timeline of the original, I feel very comfortable considering this entirely non-canon. And it might as well be that way since, dear fucking lord, I hate this movie even more than Hunchback 2, and I didn't know that was possible. This movie though! It found a way! The basic plot is that the fair has come to town and our main duo decides to go, finding a pack of dogs called the Singing Strays who've been having an argument with their main singer and decide Copper is a good replacement, leading to Todd feeling left out and like his best friend has forgotten him, teaming up with the now kicked out member to bring things back to normal. Want to know how much of that's connected to the previous movie? Besides the character names and appearances, absolutely fucking nothing. For the other films with their specific locations, character dynamics, and histories, you could make an argument for why those were written with being sequels or midquels or whatever in mind. This? I'm pretty certain there was a script about two friends finding some talking dogs, and Disney decided that the only way to sell it would be as a midquel to Fox and the Hound of all properties. This could have been about any two animal friends, or maybe even human friends, it doesn't matter. The addition of Fox and the Hound has no relation literally, chronologically, or thematically to what's going on, and I especially want to emphasize thematically. The Fox and the Hound was a story of prejudice. It was about racism and intolerance, the division of man through superficial borders portrayed through the relationship of a fox and dog growing up to hate each other not because they want to, but because others tell them that's how it has to be. That's the moral of the story. What sort of theming is here? As far as I know, none. And that'd be fine if it wasn't a midquel to Fox and the Hound, a film all about symbolism and meaning. And even disregarding the original, one of its major plot points is a total undeserved contrivance. The main falling out in the third act scene comes when the group finds out that Copper isn't a stray, meaning he can't be part of the performance, and that makes no sense to me since they clearly aren't strays themselves. From the start, they act like they don't have a home and even comment on Copper not having a collar, stating that a lack of one means not having a place to go back to. But some of the very dogs stating as much in that exact scene are wearing visible fucking collars. They perform for this one guy, live in his van, get fed by him. What do you call that? How, in any conceivable fashion, are they real strays with no homes? They aren't, so this imaginary conflict they've come up with is the definition of pulled right out the ass. Not that I cared for any of the dogs to begin with, considering they're all one-dimensional and have no memorable qualities. There's the dumb twins, they say dumb things and mostly talk to one another. Old-ass dog, she burps and scrapes her ass across wood. Leader guy, he's a bit of a control freak. And girl dog, she's a diva. I didn't bother writing down any of their names, since I know I could be using that space in my brain for something more substantial, like thinking about how unlikely it is that I'll ever get a short tsundere girlfriend. Oh yeah, that's much less painful. The rest of the plot and characters aren't worth mentioning because Todd and Copper are nowhere near as compelling as they originally were, and you can point out every plot point that happens to a T. The whole project is an obvious cash grab, and I'd love to say that no one cared, but the animation is too good and the songs are too well put together for me to think that. But inadvertently, that makes me hate it more. You took the work of people who care about making a good product and used them for Fox and the Hound too. Something that would have benefited from having some rougher edges like its predecessor. On a technical level, it's better, but partially for that reason, I'm gonna be ranking it lower than Hunchback 2 to be at the very bottom of the list. Fuck this thing and everything that it stands for. Okay, so tell me, what would your first thought be going into a direct-to-DVD Disney sequel film entitled Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time? You'd assume it'd be the most utter shit disaster of a cash grab you'd ever seen, right? But no, this movie is actually really good and I like it a ton, maybe even more than the original. Seemingly taking place before the events of Dreams Come True, the script plays off a rather simple concept. What if the evil stepmother and stepsisters got the fairy godmother's wand? Naturally, the stepmother reverses time before her plans went horribly wrong, making it so Anastasia fits the glass slipper and gets to be with the prince, leading Cinderella to rot. From there, it's a whirlwind of emotion, suspense, magic, some absolute banging musical numbers, and phenomenal animation. Out of all those things, I want to put special attention on the cast and their personalities, however, since they're what make the movie as delightful as it is. We already got a small glimpse into the redeeming side of Anastasia when she got with the baker in Dreams Come True, so having her as a sort of semi-protagonist for the film worked incredibly well. She's sort of shy, contemplative, unsure of herself, but kind nonetheless, indicating that she only ever acted the way she did in previous installments since it was how her mother wanted Anastasia to act, and she desperately wanted her approval, so she went along with it. But here, she's gentler and has a charm in her lack of grace, being more ditzy than mean-spirited. By the end of the film, you understand her heartache about not being with the prince, as she genuinely wants him to love her. But you also have some solace in knowing that later on, she'll find the man for her. And that brings me to Prince Charming, who they gave a personality to, and he fits the role perfectly. The man is a total himbo, and I love it. He's gracious and charming, but a little bit crazy and out there. You can never tell what this man is going to do next, and that is so refreshing compared to the first film, where he did his job of being what Cinderella wants, but not having any personality of his own to speak of. That prince would never be told to not go down the stairs and then jump out the fucking window and climb down. He's oozing with, well, charm, and he's voiced by the same guy who did Prince Eric in Little Mermaid, and you can definitely feel some of that performance in this. And come on, how could you hate a guy with this line?
But the talking mice say she's the wrong girl.
Have I mentioned how funny this movie is? Because it's way funnier than it has any right to be, and I have no idea how that happened. This script was made by 2 unknown writers and the guy who did the Hannah Montana movie. Make it make sense to me. Part of the prince's great humor comes from his new shtick with his dad, the king, who's been turned from a loud dumbass who wants grandchildren into an understanding, sentimental guy who's just a bit burnt out on the craziness of his son. He's still supportive of the prince's ideas though, and comes to like Anastasia, even after it's revealed she lied, showing a kind of compassion to her that the evil stepmother never could have, who goes off the rails here. While once she was a dramatic ice-cold demon bitch, in Cinderella 3 she's pretty much transformed into a supervillain thanks to the power awarded to her through the wand. She takes full advantage of every situation and revels in her own evil whenever possible. It's awesome. At one point she tries killing Cinderella by having a human version of her cat Lucifer wildly drive her off a cliff in a rotting version of her iconic pumpkin carriage, which is so brutal and sadistic and great in its own way. I'm not always hot on over-the-top villain characters, but this is an example where it's done right, and the writers knew it, since she's got plenty of time to show off while tormenting the stepsisters and Cinderella alike. Nice, nice, far too nice for what it is, above Simba's pride in the ranking. I don't know how to feel, and I don't mean that about the movie itself, but how it serves as a closing entry in this video. I was hoping that the last film would either be a massive high or a massive low, depending on how it went, but Ariel's beginning is so boringly average that I'm honestly a little stunned. Where to begin? So, remember Footloose, 1984, Kevin Bacon, about a small town that outlawed dancing for some stupid reason? Cultural milestone when it came out, but most people only know about it now for that one song it had, was never really praised and still doesn't hold up all that well in retrospect despite being considered a nostalgic classic. Yeah, Ariel's Beginning is that exact premise, except it's underwater and they replace dancing with singing. Because, I mean, how are they supposed to dance? They don't got legs, stupid. You gotta think about these things, see? The apparent reason for music being outlawed is that Ariel's mom loved music and had a music box given to her by Triton, but then one day the crust-dissolved pirate ship came to town and killed her by awkwardly fading in and out as she tried to save the music box. I don't understand how that would constitute getting rid of all music in any circumstance. Like, Trolls had a better explanation for a character disliking singing with the whole, "because music killed my grandma, okay." Music had literally nothing to do with her death in any way other than tangentially in relation to an item she held dear, and I'm not making this up. After like 10 years, when Ariel finally asks why he outlawed music, he can't provide an explanation and almost immediately after realizes just how fucking stupid it is. That's the actual line of events. Not that I need to tell you about the rest of the movie, cause it's as predictable as could be. There are people who do like music, Ariel finds and joins them, they get found out by the villainess who is not Ursula for some reason, the king has a change of heart, villainess gets defeated, yada yada, happy ending. I don't know for what reason anyone would actively want to watch this movie. Like, I've sorta had that reaction to a few sequels here, but I especially can't figure out why someone would watch Ariel's Beginning, let alone actively. The animation is good, some characters are okay, I like the henchman to the villain, he's fun, but who gives a fuck? It's not incredibly bad, not incredibly good, doesn't have almost any standout qualities, doesn't do anything to make it subversive or interesting or terrible. It's nothing. It's bland, and I don't want to talk about it any further, because I'm just that bored by it. Above Cinderella 2, I guess, for having some cool animation, but yeah, nothing of substance. And wow, that took way longer than I was expecting it to, but I can't say the journey didn't have plenty to offer. I was amazed by some that I could actually consider good films, other times I was completely appalled, for several of them I was mostly meh, but I'm glad I decided to take the dive anyway. Really, there could have been several other ways I used my time worse than this, and it was fun finding the hidden gems when possible. Even for the terrible movies, I had fun ripping them apart and giving myself more reasons to dislike Disney as a company, so there's that. It's hard to really map out a decisive line of best fit for quality, since the outliers are so prominent in both extremes all along the way. And this is my personal opinion, so maybe you want to watch all these for yourselves to get your own opinion. But I got a list to get to that I know you all have been waiting for. So without further ado, my ranking of every Disney direct-to-DVD sequel. At the bottom of the list, we got The Fox and the Hound 2, Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, Belle's Magical World, Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True, The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Beginning, Mulan 2, Kronk's New Groove, Aladdin, The Return of Jafar, Pocahontas, Journey to a New World, Little Mermaid, Return to the Sea, Stitch the Movie, Atlantis, Milo's Return, Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, The Lion King 1.5, Tarzan 2, The Legend Begins, Bambi 2, Lady and the Tramp 2, Scamp's Adventure, Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch, Brother Bear 2, Aladdin and the King of Thieves, Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time, 101 Dalmatians, Patch's London Adventure, and number 1, an extremely goofy movie. I don't know what else to say, but thank you all for watching through this incredibly long experience. I don't know when the next video is coming out, but it'll probably be in a while. See you in the next one. Goodbye.